Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Certificate on Human Trafficking webinar. I don't know if someone can give a thumbs up to show that they can hear us, but we are so excited you are here. My name is Darla Bardine. I'm the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth. And we are, okay, good. Someone said we can hear you. Someone did let us know that chat was disabled for attendees. We are working to fix that now. And that's probably why nobody is sharing their name, title, organization, and pronouns in chat. As soon as chat is enabled, if you all could kind of virtually introduce yourselves in the chat so we can just all know who's here in the space. We have 128 folks here. Thank you so much. We expect more people to keep joining. For now, if you have, you can put video on if you're comfortable. We're not going to shame anyone into putting their video on, but we are happy to see your face if you will share it. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in Q&A because that is enabled. If after chat's enabled, you want to throw them in chat, you can put them there too. I am the moderator today. I will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chats, and you can put your questions in as you have them, and we will spend time at the end going over those. Next slide, please, Eddie. So if you're not familiar with the National Network for Youth, we are dedicated to preventing and ending youth and young adult homelessness. And we believe that no young person in America should ever experience homelessness or human trafficking. Yet 4.2 million youth and young adults experience homelessness every year, and at least 900,000 young people experience human trafficking. Next slide. We are a membership network of community-based service providers, foundations, state agencies, and national partners. There's a lot of benefits. Some of them include, we advocate in DC, fighting to expand for more resources, more funding, and for the implementation of common sense policy solutions. We also provide unique discounts to our members. We provide updated breaking and policy and practice news. We do provide strategic consultation and technical assistance. And then you also have an opportunity to apply to join our policy advisory committee, or if you're a young person with lived experience, to apply to join our National Youth Advisory Council. Also, we listen to our members, we hear what their policy recommendations are, what their challenges are, and then we advocate to implement solutions. Next slide. So next, I'm gonna go over introductions. I'm gonna introduce you to our esteemed panelists today. They're gonna cover an overview of the online Certificate on Human Trafficking training program. They're gonna talk about how this certificate can support your work. And then finally, they'll wrap up with how to register for the program online. And then we'll have time to answer any questions that you provide. Next slide. So our expert speakers today is Kelsey Sims from the McCain Institute. She is the program manager for combating human trafficking. And we have Amy Boyd from YouthWorks in North Dakota, who is an anti-trafficking supervisor. And with that, I'm going to say next slide and hand it to Kelsey. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Darla, and thanks to everyone who has joined us. I'm really looking forward to sharing a bit more about this Certificate on Human Trafficking program. Eddie, if we want to go ahead to the next slide. This course was developed in coordination with the National Network for Youth a number of years ago and was initially created as a 2-day in-person training. And what we really heard is that there was a broader need to make this more accessible and available to those within the community who might not be able to travel to participate in the training or some other sort of limitation. And so what we've done is we've taken what used to be an in-person training and we've transferred it to an online platform in partnership with Arizona State University. This course is really focused on ensuring that those who come into contact with at-risk youth know how to identify indicators of trafficking and connect those youth with the appropriate services. I will quickly mention that while this is offered through Arizona State University, you do not need to be a student of the university to take the course. It is open to the public. And you can see listed there on the right side of your screen is just a short list of the types of the roles who might benefit in taking this course, and of course is not exhaustive. Lastly, I do want to make sure and mention this course is accredited by the National Association of Social Workers. Learners can receive up to 6 credit hours per course for a total of 12 credit hours if the full certificate is completed. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you so much. So the first course here is the 101 Foundations course. This is a prerequisite to the second course in the program. And both courses are skills and knowledge-based and really focus on how to respond to youth experiencing trafficking in appropriate and trauma-informed ways. Listed here on the screen, you see the 6 modules that learners will work through as they participate in this first course. It focuses on the fundamentals of human trafficking and the impacts of trauma. It also covers case management and legal obligations to report, as well as how your response to supporting an individual might change depending on where you're located, such as being based in an urban versus a rural location. As I mentioned, both courses are open for enrollment, at any time, and there is no required timeline to complete the course. So it is completely self-paced, it is fully online, and based off of ASU's assessment and previous learners, we estimate that it takes approximately 17 hours to complete this course. I'd like to give Amy an opportunity if you want to spend a few minutes talking about what learners can expect to walk away from this first course with.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm Amy Boyd, and I was part of developing this curriculum from the very beginning. It's sort of my baby, I guess. And to give a little bit of background, so for me, so I'm from North Dakota, which is a very rural state. And when I first started doing anti-trafficking work, the national trainings that I would go to seemed very geared toward urban settings, right? Which it was not particularly relevant to what we were seeing in North Dakota. And then how to respond also is different in small communities. And so part of what was really important to me is, and not to sound too like hokey, but I want every single youth who comes into contact with people who are working with them I want them to be intervened with in the most effective way, in the most kind, compassionate way possible, and by people who really understand trafficking and how to intervene. And so what this foundational course really lays so it's like the what, right? What is human trafficking? How do you identify it? How do you respond to, like, some of the things that you can expect to learn are the nuances of, if you're working with a youth and they disclose trafficking to you, how do you ensure that they know that you have to report that, right? So if there's safe harbor laws in your state, which just is a law that says if a youth is being trafficked, they are automatically to be seen as a child in need of protection versus a child who is delinquent. And so it goes into pretty good detail, I think, about how do you lay the groundwork for that from the very beginning, your first contact with the youth. How do you do informed consent with them so that if they do choose to disclose trafficking to you, you can preserve that relationship with the youth. You can empower the youth to be a part of even the reporting process so that they still have some power, right? Because they're not used to having much power. So the foundation, it really is just this foundational base from which you can then learn more in depth. And Kelsey will talk about on the next slide, then exactly how. What are the interventions you use? I think that's the biggest thing that I want people to take away. Is there anything else you'd want me to add, Kelsey?
No, I think that really covered it, Amy. Thank you.
I also just want to say for all of the like audience or participants, Kelsey and I did not have a phone call this morning about that we were going to wear the same exact color and match. It's just, great minds. So don't judge us.
Eddie, if we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So as Amy mentioned, this practical applications course is the second 201 more advanced in-depth course. This is also the final course in the full certificate program. It is similarly 6 modules and takes approximately 17 hours to complete. What I will explain towards the end is kind of that registration process of signing up for both courses at the same time versus signing up for them separately. So we'll be sure to cover that. This course does go more into depth into screening young clients and understanding the effects of trauma, both on trafficked youth as well as those who are providing the services. And Amy, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about that. I think that really stands out in this second course.
Yeah, I think so too. So, at least I hope so. So trafficking of any individual, right? But particularly with youth. So you're intersecting with the child welfare world, juvenile justice world. There are so many nuances. And even if we just take the example of how to screen, right? There's different philosophies about how you screen and what kind of screening instruments you use. And everybody wants a screening instrument that they can just like, it's going to give them what they need and they can just kind of move forward with that. And I have some opinions and thoughts about that, which are working with youth. The goal of screening is never, ever, ever to get like full disclosure. You don't need to know details of the trafficking situation that the youth has experienced. You do want to be screening for trafficking with your clientele because they have unique needs, right? The trauma of trafficking is different than any other trauma. I've been a social worker for a really long time, and the trauma that trafficking survivors experience is different than any other population I've ever worked with. They have layered, complex trauma. One of the things that we talk about in the training, like a disclaimer, like these are difficult subjects to talk about. It's a really difficult thing to talk about. And so even as I'm talking about this certificate with you guys, I want to be cognizant that it's difficult information. So the trauma that trafficked youth experience, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, it takes a toll on their physical body. It takes a toll on their mental health. And how you screen for them is so important, or screen for trafficking is so important. And one of the examples that I usually talk about is if you're screening for trafficking with the youth, and whether you choose to ask the question, like, have you ever exchanged sex for something of value, which I don't do that. I tend to rely on observation and then normalizing sort of conversation with them. But if you are screening for that and a youth says no, right? So my experience is sometimes when you screen for that, a youth will be like, ugh, gross. I would never. And why are you even asking me? And it's disgusting. How you respond to that is incredibly important. And the temptation for a lot of people is to respond by saying, oh, good. I'm glad you haven't experienced that. But what message do you send when you say that? You send the message that this is big and it's bad. And I don't want you to have experienced that. And I kind of want to protect myself. Like, it's a really complicated. So the way to respond if somebody says, no, I haven't, how I typically respond is, and if they say like, ew, right? If they're like in that space with it, I usually will say something like, well, okay, like, I don't judge that, right? Like my favorite people that I work with have experienced this. And so I'm not going to judge that, because what you want at the end of the day is a space where youth can, if they want to, come back to you and disclose, this has happened to me and I need help with it. So the screening module itself, right? That's a whole thing. And then every other aspect there, like assessing, how do you serve them? Those are completely separate modules. And so what I would want for people when they are done with this is to feel really confident that they know how to do that. Clearly, I'm passionate about it and could talk about it forever, but Kelsey, did I miss anything?
No, Amy, that's why we have you here. I mean, you are the expert. Amy is also the instructor as part of the course. So this is just, you can speak better to it than anybody else.
Thank you. I actually want to say something else. Good luck getting me to shut up. So one of the things that I want to say is, you may hear me swear during the curriculum. Like it's just part of how I communicate sometimes. And I think if you're working with trafficked youth, that becomes kind of a norm. So the other thing I want to say too, though, is if you're working in the anti-trafficking field, you most likely have secondary trauma. I'm super clear that I have secondary trauma, and that I didn't realize until like it was kind of too late to prevent it, for sure. And so it's really important to me, and a norm in my practice when I supervise people is we're going to talk about secondary trauma. We are going to talk about protective factors for that. We're going to make sure that we're holding each other accountable to have good boundaries and to take good care of ourselves. And so I really, really like that the last module is like secondary trauma. And I'm watching the chat as people introduce themselves, and I see that there was a former prosecutor that just introduced themselves. And one of the things that I did not realize until I started doing this work is the amount of secondary trauma that prosecutors have. Right? They read everything. They read all of the evidence of what happened to victims of crime. And I don't think there's a lot of emphasis or training on the secondary trauma that they have. And so it's really important that we're taking care of that piece of it for ourselves, but of course, ultimately for our clients. I'm done now.
Perfect. Eddie, if we want to go on to the next slide, I think, Amy, you really led us into this slide perfectly as we talk about kind of the different supplemental materials that come with the course. It really is not just a series of lectures, but rather an interactive opportunity for you to speak and build a network with other course participants. There are discussion posts as part of each module, opening reflections, closing reflections. We have a lot of supplemental videos, reading materials that folks have found helpful and shared with us over the years. And what you see on the screen here is an example of an interactive element within the course. They will not all look like this, but we really do recognize the value that comes from practicing what you've learned. And so throughout the course, you'll have different interactive examples. This is an intake and needs assessment, very similar to what Amy was just discussing. And so I think, what you can expect is a comprehensive program that goes beyond just listening to some video slides throughout your day. Amy, anything you want to add there?
I don't think so. The only thing I would add is like some words of encouragement of people who choose to do this. Like, don't expect that you're gonna, like, it's learning. So like, if you choose the wrong answer, like, don't worry about that, because you're learning, you're in the midst of learning, and that's fine. And also I saw a chat, I need to be louder. So I will be louder, but I won't yell.
No, I think that's great. And where I think there is also a lot of value add is going back to those discussion posts and the opportunity to build relationships and have conversations with other learners who are participating simultaneously or reading through how other folks have responded to certain questions, takeaways. It just really opens the world of learning. You're not doing this alone. You're doing this with a cohort and a community, which I think is really valuable and takes kind of that what you don't always get in an online situation. We've tried to really change and make it feel more personal. Eddie, if we want to go to the next slide. Perfect. Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So I have to tell people that, so when Kelsey and Darla and Eddie and I were having initial conversations about this event, right? So that we could share information with you. And I actually had not seen any of the like feedback, right, from people who had taken the course. And so we're going through the slides, and on this slide, I said, so this is just an example, right? These aren't actually the numbers. And Kelsey's like, no, these are the real numbers. And I'm like, I need a minute. Like, this is so great. It's so important to me that people who do this feel confident, like, right? Like personally, like the 97% said that they felt confident to how to identify and mitigate the effects of secondary trauma. I'm like, I want the 3% so I can do a better job so that they can, we can get to 100%. This is what I want. This is the whole reason that we developed this, so that after taking it, you feel like you're equipped to do it. This work is hard to almost impossible, right? And you learn. I have a good friend who, what she would say when we were first starting is, she would say, we're building the plane while we're flying it. And I'd be like, Christina, you can't do that. Like, you have to have the plane flying while you're in it. But that's what it feels like a lot. Like, I've been doing this work for 8 years, social work much longer than that. And I would say probably the first 3 years that I did the work, I felt totally incompetent. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And the stakes felt so high to me, right? Like the people that I served, I was aware that they were in a situation where they could die. And I've had clients die, right? And so it's so important to know, to feel like you've got it. And you're never going to feel like, I personally am very skeptical of people who say they totally got it, right? Because I think there's always room for learning, but I definitely want people to walk away from this feeling really confident, that at least they've got an understanding. So this, like, I did have a moment and I maybe got a little teary, which was ridiculous, but it's really cool. I think next slide, Eddie. Yeah, okay. So when I saw this too, which is a real testimonial, well, first of all, I'm like, this is braggadocious of me and I shouldn't even be the one talking about it. But so I would say that one of the most difficult aspects of, so I built a multidisciplinary team. And when I say I built, like, I didn't really build it, right? But I was the facilitator of it. I was the one who was out, like, approaching people, like, here's what we're trying to do. Are you interested in being a part of it? And the biggest fights I've had in my professional career are with law enforcement. And there was a time, like, where I was just almost in despair, thinking that they were never going to get it, that I was going to be fighting for them to see trafficked youth as trafficked youth, and not like what I felt like they saw my clients as were like crappy kids who were making bad decisions and couldn't be trusted and just needed to be in trouble, right? And locked up. Like, and so to have a police officer say this is so powerful. It's so powerful. And it's doable, right? I would say it took 5 years for our community. Keep in mind, like, it's North Dakota, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but North Dakota is a really conservative state. And people, it's hard for people to change, I think. It's hard for people anywhere. But it took us probably 5 years of facilitated conversations and dialogues where we just worked through the hard part of not understanding each other. And so personal, like, victory. About 2 months ago, I was presenting with the very same law enforcement professional that I had the majority of my fights with, right? Like, and you know, I mean, I hope I was respectful, but he certainly knew where I stood, and he knew I was frustrated. And I'm doing a training with him. And so my biggest concern was law enforcement were not charging non-third party trafficking. And that's a whole nother thing. And we can talk about that. And you would learn about that in this curriculum. But so non-third party is really difficult for people to wrap their heads around. So non-third party, you've got an adult who is having sex, any sexual act with the youth in exchange for anything of value, right? And we don't get to decide what the thing of value is for a youth. For some of my clients, it was a ride from the reservation to Bismarck. And that has a commercial value. And if they had an adult who was having sex with them in exchange for that, that adult, under the law, state and federal law, is a trafficker and can be charged with patronizing a minor for the purposes of commercial sex. And they weren't charging that. They were charging gross sexual imposition, or, oh, my personal favorite, corruption of a minor, which is ridiculous, right? The minor is not corrupted. So I argue that terminology, and I know it's legal, but whatever. They would not do it. And so fast forward, and 2 months ago, I'm doing a training with that same sergeant, and we're training school resource officers, and he literally whips out the century code in North Dakota and says, write this down. It's century code, I don't know, blah, 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 right? You can charge this out as trafficking. And I'm like, oh my God, I love you. Like, it was so big. And then about 2 weeks later, I don't know, one of the school resource officers who had been in that training reached out to our crisis line in the middle of the night because he had made a traffic stop with a young person who had been reported as a runaway, was in the company of a 40-year-old man, and was on her way from small town in North Dakota to Minneapolis. Turns out this guy is a registered sex offender. He has a history of trafficking youth, exploiting youth, and this officer knew what to do, how to respond, and he charged him with that, that's a win, right? So it's huge. I'm done with my lecture. I'm off my soapbox. Next slide. So for me, this also, talking about what resources youth need. So that's the main reason we screen, right? We screen youth for trafficking, not because we want numbers, not because it's a shock and awe sort of thing, or because we want the details of the trafficking. We screen because they have different needs, and they have really unique needs. So, and one of the things that they have to deal with so much is shame, right? They are full of shame. And there's a real specific way to intervene with people who have shame. And knowing that that comes across in this, that you have to be mindful of that, is really important. And I'm really glad that this person was able to get that. And I hope that's what everybody would get, right? My goal is that every youth would be treated this way. So that's all I have to say about that. Kelsey, is there more you would want to say?
No, no, I think that's great. If Eddie, if we want to jump to the next slide, we can get into just some of the details about how to register, what kind of the pricing structure looks like. So, as I mentioned, this course is offered through Arizona State University. It is online. You do not need to be a student to enroll. It is self-paced. We do offer a series of discounts for those with lived experience. We have group rates. Anyone on the call who is a member of the National Network for Youth, you do have a 20% discount. And for all the folks who have joined Amy, Darla, and I during this past hour, we're also offering a 10% discount for anybody that's interested following this conversation. So as you can see listed out there, the full certificate program, which is those two courses that we walked through, the foundations and practical applications, is a total of $400. You can either do the full certificate program or you can register for those courses individually, keeping in mind you need to complete that first foundations course as a prerequisite before you can take that practical applications advanced course. So there's a bit of information here. Another reminder, this is approved for continuing education credits for a total of 12 if you complete the full certificate. So, I think with that, I'm really happy to open it up to questions. Amy, if you have any final thoughts, Darla, just really thank you all so much for joining and for your interest in this work.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kelsey. Sorry, Darla. So I was just going to say real quick, I've been looking at the questions. And so I definitely will answer those. And I know Darla's got some stuff to say probably, but after that, I'm happy to answer the questions that are in the chat. And Kristen, I hope that you ended up being able to hear me.
And so just one question we've been getting, yes, the recording of this webinar and these slides will be available. You'll get an email from us at the National Network for Youth with both of that. And then hopefully within a week, we'll also get it up on our website. And then in terms of the questions, so there's definitely a theme of questions around screening tools. So one is around screening tools that you use and recommend. And then the related question is, are there particular screening tools that this course was created around or references?
I will answer that. So, and I actually just did a presentation yesterday with Julia from Covenant House, and I see that there's some folks here from Covenant House, and I know you use the QUIT tool, which is, and to my understanding, the only validated tool for screening for trafficking with youth, but it's not validated for under the age of 18. And if I've messed that up, somebody from Covenant House can correct me with that. One of the really robust conversations that Julia and I were having as we were prepping for that presentation was I don't want to say controversy, but when you have different options, right? So we are a small nonprofit in a rural state. And how our shelter works is we are part of an attendant care shelter, which means youth who are picked up by law enforcement, if they cannot return home, come to our shelter for less than sometimes 12 hours, honestly. And so we don't have a lot of time to do a formal screening tool because in order to do a screening, you have to have developed a relationship with that youth. It is absolutely not recommended that you screen for trafficking with youth if you do not have a relationship with them or if they don't have one with your agency. Because my belief and my experience is asking another human being the question, have you ever had sex in exchange for something of value, right? Has the potential to be shaming. And if you have not worked with that youth for a long time, if you do not have that relationship, there's some there's some danger in doing that if it's not done well. And so that's a long answer to, I don't make a recommendation or about which screening tool you use. I think it's highly dependent on who is doing the screening in your agency, what your agency looks like. I saw somebody put in the See It. I really like that tool because it's very much observational. I am not trained in the See It. It's, I can't remember what it stands for. It's in the chat. But I think it's from like San Diego. And it's very much observational, which is my style and what we do. So I am not going to recommend a screening tool. What I would want is for people to look at how their agency functions, look at who's going to be doing that screening, and what makes sense for your population. And I'm sorry if that's not a really great answer, but it's the best answer I have, and I don't want to give you a bad answer. Darla, Kelsey, do you feel like I answered that? Or participants, please feel free to say, yeah, no, that was stupid, and we want you to tell us more.
No, 100%. And I think we also reference that, you know, different state law and federal law will require specific screening tools, which is partly why we didn't do this training around one screening tool, because it is a national training. And so we want it to be relevant, whatever your kind of legal requirements are.
Yeah, so I'm reading some of the questions.
Mhm.
So confidential and privileged information. So what I will say is, if you are a licensed social worker and like if you are a mandated reporter, there's no way to get around the fact that you are a mandated reporter. You have to report trafficking. Because it is abuse of a child. So when I say that, it has to be 18 and under, right? You're not mandated to report from over the age of 18. But how you do that is really important. And it's part of our responsibility to that youth. So I see what you're saying, John, like I get, but privilege. So in North Dakota, social workers don't have privilege. I think the only people that do are licensed professional counselors and attorneys and domestic violence advocates, I believe.
Amy, can people email you to ask questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Keep in mind, I am a supervisor at a crisis agency.
She'll answer when she can. And all of our emails are on the next slide. So you'll definitely be provided with that. And then I think there's some more Kelsey questions. One is, are the credits for the course transferable? I don't know.
I'm not. Okay. So Melissa, feel free to chat another question if this doesn't answer yours. In terms of the credits being transferable, if you're a student at ASU University, at Arizona State University, you would need to meet with whoever your college head is to determine what they would consider those credits as. So in terms of what's available for this, it is currently just a standalone certificate program, and you get those CEs from the National Association of Social Workers and your like credit of completion that you can include on your resume, etc. But in order for them to be affiliated or tied to a specific, perhaps like bachelor's degree or master's degree, that would really be up to your university head or supervisor.
And the other Kelsey question is if there's a brochure that they could share, and if the school takes a state voucher for payment.
There is absolutely a brochure. I'm happy to share that with anybody that's interested. Perhaps when that goes out in a follow-up email, we can share that flyer. In regards to the state vouchers for payment, I would need to look into that a bit more and talk to ASU. So Victoria, perhaps you could send me a separate email and we could get to the bottom of that. My email will be listed on the next slide.
I really want to mention, like, thank you to the person who talked about the See It being a validated tool. I think it was Amba who said that. And particularly that it's been validated with survivor feedback. Like, that's huge. I personally believe that every effort should be made so that you have survivors on staff and that you have a youth advisory board that has survivors of all lived experience, right? So it's wonderful to know that that's validated. And I'm sure I was told that, and I just didn't retain that information, but thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it a lot. I do know that you have to be trained in it. Like, it's not something that you can just administer. You have got to be trained in it.
And another question is if the certificate courses are specific to youth and minors.
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
Yes. But keep in mind that youth is up to age 24 by, like, I think FISB, the Family Youth,
Services Bureau.
Thank you. I'm really bad at acronyms. So youth for us goes up to age 24. But of course, then there's that area of weirdness where different things apply to young adults versus juveniles or minors.
And then another question, is there anything in the course that specifically addresses the overrepresentation of Native American people?
Yes. Sorry, I feel real strongly about that. So, yeah, like, so I call it the mothership. Our main office is in Bismarck, North Dakota, which is our state capital. And it's 45 minutes north of the Standing Rock Sioux sovereign nation. And I work really closely with, her name is Pauletta Redwillow, and she is a fierce woman, if she were here, she would say she is a fierce Lakota woman. She comes from warriors, right? Kicked Custer's butt, like, that's her, right? And her and I do a lot of training and talking about how to intervene specifically with Native American youth. I will say the best way to intervene with Native American youth is to be Native American. And Pauletta and I have many conversations. We do some of our best work over margaritas and queso and chips, right? And I will be saying to her, like, I need more Native women to come up here and to be working with our youth. 90% of the youth that we serve in Bismarck are Lakota. And I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I am not Lakota, right? I am Irish and Norwegian. And Pauletta and I will have conversations where I'm like, I need, and I'm it. Like, and she's like, it can't be you. And I'm like, well, I'm what you got. Like, so, you know, it's really important to be culturally aware. I don't like the expression culturally competent because I don't have the right to be competent in Lakota culture, but I can be culturally aware and I can link to resources. Unfortunately, there might not be resources. Like, that is a really unpalatable reality of really rural states. And it has to do with systemic racism and historical oppression. So the ideal thing would be if I were a Lakota worker working with Lakota girls, but I am not. And so I have to do the next best thing, which is be human and humble and educate myself about what is the norm in Lakota culture so that I don't violate that norm and so that I don't impose my Irish Midwest values onto them. I know that's a really long answer, but it's a complicated thing, right? I think part of our responsibility as professional workers, as nonprofits, whatever we are, is to increase capacity. So if there's a grant that exists for a tribe, for a tribal community, then I think our responsibility, if we know about that, is to have contacts within the tribe to say, here's a grant, and how can we help you with this so that you can serve and we can support? Like, how can we support you? I know that's a really long answer. There's no good answer, I think. Darla, are there more
That's
questions?
great. No, yes, there's more. A question about the LGBTQ community and if this certificate would be good for working with homeless trafficked youth, 16 to young adults.
Yes. So I would say that it's woven into the curriculum because, again, as we know, so I'm comfortable using the verbiage queer youth, right? But LGBTQ plus youth, well over half of the clients that we serve in the Bismarck area identify as queer, right? Whether it's transgender, bi, and it's, again, really important that you have people with lived experience working with those youth. And if that's not possible, then at least same thing as with any disenfranchised community, that you educate yourself about that and you link to resources. So yeah, they're overrepresented in trafficking.
And then another question, what are some initiatives and programs that can be set to facilitate people who have been victims of trafficking?
I don't know that I'm clear on what that.
I think, like, what are effective initiatives and programs to address trafficking?
Effective programs to address it. I don't know. Like, I don't really know what that question means. I'm super sorry. Maybe I'm just being dumb. Read it one more time to me slowly, like, so I can really focus.
What are some initiatives and programs that can be set, or I guess created, to help people who have been victims of human trafficking?
Okay, and I'm seeing somebody say residential treatment programs. So my experience, so my job prior to the demotion to management was to be the person to link people to those programs. And there are some, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it depends on in your state. So the majority of the youth that we serve, because they're trafficked, they almost always end up being custodial youth, right? Because it is a child protection issue. And facilities have to have agreements with the Medicaid in your state to be a provider. So there are places where I think it would be good for our youth to go, perhaps, but they can't go because they are not a provider within that system. There's some nonprofit places that you can go to, but I've had a hard time, I think, finding places that I have felt were really successful for our youth. And if there are places out there that are fantastic and I don't know, then I apologize for like saying that I haven't found any. If people have ideas about that, I would love to know that. You know, the other thing is I don't, working in child welfare for a long time, I don't know that I believe that the answer is for them to go someplace. I think the answer is to build a community around them, to have community, you know, like, so we have host homes, which are specialized foster homes for youth, where they can go and they stay in the community, or if it's a different community, so they're away from their trafficker. And it's community-based services versus residential services, so that you can do reunification with family if that's appropriate. Oftentimes when youth go into residential placements, the focus, I know it's well-meaning, they're going to, you know, they want to do reunification with families, but oftentimes, so in North Dakota, if there's a residential facility It might be on the eastern side of the state, and the western side of the state is where the family is from. That's a like 7-hour drive, right? And families don't have the funds for that. So it's a complicated answer, like everything with trafficking.
Any other questions? And Eddie, if you can go to the next slide to, because everybody wants Amy and Kelsey's email.
Oh,
Right.
I want to address, sorry, John Kentberry. Yes, so the public awareness. So there is a program called Home Safe. Is it Home Safe or Home Free, Darla?
Home free for Greyhound.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I'm really impressed with that program. So basically, and you can Google it, but I have had youth before, and you cannot make the arrangements for the youth with that program. Like the youth has to do it themselves. So it's very youth focused. And you maybe actually have seen the billboards, because they do, I think, a pretty good job of having them. But basically it's a program where youth can call in. They're connected with special like operators who have specialized training, and they do like safety assessments, figure out how to get them where they need to go. They're really progressive. They're really interested in being as good as possible.
Any other questions? Someone commented, Amy, that cultural humility is so important, and thanking you for making those points. We are all on a journey learning together.
True. Yeah, it's just my pet peeve when people say culturally competent. Like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
You don't have the right to be. like, no.
Well, I think, the questions are slowing down. Here are our emails. Everybody who registered and everybody who attended will get an email from us with the recording, the slides, and also the flyer so that you can share it with folks. The registration link is here. Remember, you all get a 10% discount. If you're a member of the National Network for Youth, you get a 20% discount. Eddie did put a link to a survey just to tell us how we did on today's webinar. We're always looking for feedback, always looking to improve. And just thank you so much for your time. And thank you to Kelsey and Amy.
Yes, Andrea, that was the program I was talking about. Home free.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you.
afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. Be well.